Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Nestle Headlines. Today we're going to talk about the Sahara. The last video I kind of mentioned the Green Sahara time period, which at the time I was referring to which at the time was called the Neolithic subpluvial, or the Holocene wet phase that extended between 7500 to 7000 BC to about 3500 to 3000 BC. So that's what I was talking about when I was talking about the Green Sahara. Here's a satellite image of what's now the Sahara. So at the time, the main consensus is that desertification in the Sahara, in this region, is like a 41,000 year cycle that's caused by the tilt of the Earth's axis. So the next time it's going to be green, according to this theory, is around 17,000 AD, the year 17,000, around there. So we've still got a ways to go. But the Green Sahara period was kind of like a wet period. It was kind of like an anomaly due to the amount of glaciers that were receding at the time. So now that the glaciers are pretty much gone, it became drier and drier. During the Green Sahara, there was still moisture in the air. And the reason why the desertification didn't spread to this green area down here is because of the monsoons and the rains are extending basically on that lower half of Africa. For the longest time, scientists thought that the Sahara Desert was formed because of this reason, but also due to human settlement. This study came out that goes against that conclusion, and really they actually slowed down the onset of the desert for 500 years, according to this research. A team of geographers and archaeologists from UCL and King's College in London, they suggest that the early pastoralists who were occupying North Africa at the time combined detailed knowledge of the environment with newly domesticated species to deal with long-term drying trend. So before then, it was thought that the early pastoralists in North Africa developed sparse vegetation. They were managing sparse vegetation and dry and low fertility soils, but really the humans were acting as a stabilizing influence rather than one detrimental to the environment. And this fact basically has significant implications. So Dr. Chris Brearley, this is what he says. He says, "We contest the common narrative that past human-environment interactions must always be one of over-exploitation and degradation." So again, this is one of those articles where it's disproving a lot of assumptions that were made by previous meteorologists and geologists and even some archaeologists as well. He goes on, "The fact that societies practicing pastoralism persisted in this region for so long and invested both economically and ideologically in the local landscape does not support the scenario of over-exploitation." Right, they were acting more as stewards of their environment rather than what you see now, which is just exploiting the land over and over again until you exhaust the resources. That is not what happened. He goes on, "Our study shows that increasing human population and sustainable pastoralism did not accelerate and may even have delayed the decline of the Green Sahara." So around 8,000 years ago, the Sahara wasn't a desert, but it was a vibrant ecosystem that supported hunter-gatherers and fishermen. This period was in the time when North Africa was much more wet than it was today, largely because of these monsoons. And remember, that's because of the glaciers. The fact that the glaciers were there, the monsoons were able to rain on this part of Africa, the northern part of Africa. As the Earth's orbit slowly changed, the rain started to reduce. Yeah, the tilt was changing over time, and then the vegetation was receding back. And then 5,500 years ago, the ecosystem in the Sahara went into terminal decline, and we have what we have today. So pastoralism came to rise, according to what's in the record now, about 1,000 years before the collapse. The previous studies kind of threw the nomads under the bus and they blamed them for this desertification. This study is kind of dispelling the myth. So this is pretty straightforward, right? The nomads were, and he does bring up a good point. Why would they build a culture and a society around all the landscape? Why would they bother to spend so much time and effort on preserving the landscape when they're overexploiting it? That doesn't make any sense at all. There weren't corporations at the time either. These were people who were connected to the land and had lived there for God knows how long before then. The study uses a novel climate vegetation model to determine whether the end of the African human period, or the Green Sahara period, occurred earlier than expected. The model keeps track of variables such as vegetation and rainfall, other processes such as the amount of energy coming from the sun and the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The model found that it should have collapsed earlier, but the pastoralists, they lasted longer because they had techniques and they were resilient and they were adaptive to the environmental changes. Basically, they were ready. But I don't think they knew that it would keep going. They probably thought it was just a rough period, when in reality the earth was tilting and they had to get out of Dodge sooner or later. Dr. Brearley adds, those places where pastoralists last longer are where there are more resources. That is obviously more resources means you can stick around longer. Good adaptation to the climate change taking place at the time. There is now work today looking at what we can learn from nomadic pastoralists, such as selective grazing strategies, which can be applied to sustainable adaptation to desertification. It's not hard to find evidence of human occupation from the last 11,000 years. Thousands of rock art sites illustrate a lush environment, large game hunting, and livestock herding. So 11,000 years ago, so like around 9,000 BC. The spread of domestic animals across the Sahara occurred at a time of increasing climatic instability, younger dryas, right? And yet these pastoralist populations thrived. And this kind of goes hand in hand with that skeleton they found in Morocco, the 315,000-year-old Sapiens. This is around that area. Let's take a look at the map again. So around here is where he was found. Back then, it was probably if the desertification of the Sahara is indeed a 41,000-year cycle, then that's a couple cycles back, right? That's more than a couple. It's like that's like 6 or 7 cycles, right? Let's call it 6 cycles ago. If that's true. All that stuff is still there. So that's something that probably some archaeologists should look into, I think. There's probably a lot of stuff there that has been untouched for eons. It's likely that strategies used by contemporary traditional herders, such as seasonal movement and selective grazing, these are the two main techniques that they use to really get the most out of the land or help maintain an otherwise deteriorating ecosystem. Now, the fact that I wanted to go over this, or the reason why I wanted to go over this article, is because there are a lot of misconceptions about the human populations during times of severe change. Although I'm sure the desertification of the Sahara did not happen overnight. Eventually, the community that was occupying that space, the writing was on the wall. The deserts were getting bigger, but it wasn't something that happened overnight. So I think because of that fact, it's very easy for scholars to underestimate the populations back then and really not give them enough credit about how resilient they were. And again, with the younger dryas and the two common impacts between 12,600 to 9,600 years ago, the humans definitely had the humans of that time. Obviously, they survived because we're here today, but the way in which they survived is important because they probably passed down these pastoralist ideas from whatever civilization they may have come from, they may have originated, and they use that to get through a process like desertification. And I think that has to be noted, especially today, because there's so much coming out and so many monkey wrenches being thrown in so many previous beliefs that I think it's important to go over why they do go against the grain, and more importantly, try to understand why the previous authorities in the field were wrong, essentially. So let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.